Hello, hello, Luminary. We have our upcoming new moon happening on March 10th in Pisces. And this beautiful Pisces new moon, co ruled by Jupiter and Neptune, sits right almost at the exact midway point between Saturn, who's going to be spending its entire time in Pisces this year, and Neptune also spending its entire time in Pisces this year. What does that mean for us change makers, entrepreneurs, and leaders so we can set new Piscean intentions in our change making work? Welcome to Star Powered Astrology for Changemakers. I'm Leslie Tagorda, your guide, a Hawaii born Filipino Jewish astrologer who loves navigating visionaries like you through the spiritual journey of your work so that you can be inspired to lead by your chart and become the luminary leader you were born to be. Okay. Welcome, welcome, Luminary. It is another episode of the Star Powered podcast, and today is all about our Pisces new moon. And I have a special guest with me, a beautiful soul, one who weaves all of these different modalities of stellar modalities together to create their one of a kind mark. Welcome, welcome, Ixchel Lunar. Hi, Ixchel.
Hello. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this beautiful Pisces new moon that we have. I love that you have your Mars in Pisces. Pisces is that 12th house. It's so funny. I also have my Mars in the 12th house. It's such an interesting place for Mars. Um, but I wanted to bring you on today for a number of reasons. Number one, I you've been on the podcast before. This isn't your debut. You helped us with the 2024 and the stars panel. Um, but you are also finishing up your Astrobrand certification and adding that to all of your specialties and your modalities. Can you share a little bit about your stellar journey and what you do?
Yeah, it's so interesting to be chatting about Pisces today because when I first started learning about my chart, I was 8 years old, and my parents had gotten my chart done, and it was incorrect. It was they had me as a Pisces rising,
Oh,
and with my Mars there as well, there was some, hints to some athletic abilities and things like that, but. I spent a few years sort of studying that, and then my mom had our charts done again and found out that the time was wrong, and we were able to get that corrected. So I grew up in a household that was very much interested in astrology, and especially the lunar cycle, which
yeah.
ironically, my stepdad was really the one who was teaching and studying, and but my family name is Lunar, and so there's this other
Moon.
deep ancestral connection to the moon as well. And so I did a lot of that studying, and then I went to college, and I was so in love with the sky and being outside, and going on camping trips and being under the stars, and just whenever possible to be out under the stars. So I went into astronomy and studied astronomy and physics.
Just like
Yeah,
me.
I know we both have that sciencey background, and and had many long fights about astrology with my professors, and that was all quite interesting. And then went into women's studies, and then eventually met an incredible psychotherapist who was a master astrologer.
Wow.
And he was able to take me through all of these patterns and narratives, and really understanding how the really challenging and difficult life experiences that I'd had were sort of there for me to discover and to rewrite, and to sort of, take hold of and reclaim those narratives. And that was quite incredible. And that's how I learned about Rick Tarnas at CIS, and
Mhm.
went on and did a graduate degree there and worked with him and Stan Groff. And that was all incredibly fulfilling personally, but I never really quite knew um, if I was going to be an astrologer per se, and so never quite applied it to what I was doing, and very much was doing web design and like you as well,
Yeah.
and marketing, and so once I met you in 2022 and then learned about what you were doing, the Astroband certification and just the way that we have such similar backgrounds just
Yeah.
really connected for me in terms of being able to tie a lot of loose threads together and weave them together into something much more cohesive. So, yeah.
Beautiful, Ixchel. Oh my goodness. So I want to reflect on just a couple of things that, Ixchel, of course, knows their own story, but just the significant points that they've pointed out in this kind of roadmap. Well, first of all, Ixchel Lunar, Ixchel, the corn goddess, Lunar, the moon. And in Ixchel's natal chart, her Capricorn moon sits at the very top by exact degree on their midheaven. And so, really, you're like the wisdom holder and the wisdom keeper of all of the traditions of your mixed identity. That's another thing that we have in common is this mixed identity.
Yeah.
And that was always given to you as like a responsibility as even a young child to hold that wisdom.
Yes, as the oldest born girl, holding all of those traditions, the family heritage and records. So I, keep the family tree, I keep the family recipes and keep the traditions alive in the family. And that was always from a very young age, sort of, a duty, I would guess, put upon me, but also,
So
I
Capricornian.
respect that. Yeah, very Capricornian. My grandmother, our I don't know if it's a matriarch because she was very egalitarian, but the head of our family was also a Capricorn. And so we very much had that connection. Her birthday was on the 24th of December, and we would always gather for her birthday and bringing the family together to eat all of the tamales that we would have made a few weeks prior and
Oh, I
all of
just
that.
love that
So,
so much. When we talk about Capricorn, the wisdom in your bones, like you are just the most beautiful example of that, the bone keeper, the timekeeper, the wisdom keeper, and how you weave
mm,
all of those together. So I just want to reflect that. And then
mm.
another part of Ixchel's story that is of high significance is that you studied with two of the greats of archetypal astrology, Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff.
I am so fortunate. Rick just retired,
Yes,
not teaching anymore.
not
And
teaching. And
yeah,
so, if you don't know who Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff are, Rick Tarnas wrote the book. Oh my gosh, what is that big book that he wrote?
Passion of the Western Mind
Yes,
and
and
Cosmos and Psyche.
Cosmos and Psyche, which was just during 2020, was made into the movie. Oh gosh,
Something in the gods. I forget what the first part was.
Changing of the Gods.
Changing of the gods. Yes, because it was Uranus and Pluto were
Saturn and
really and
yes,
Saturn. Yeah,
yeah,
those
Changing of the
three.
Gods. It was like, so Rick Tarnas's book was then made into a 10-episode docu-series called Changing of the Gods that really talked about the transit of these outer planets and how they sparked revolutions in our culture, in our society and humanity. And to be able to study with him in his heyday and just learning all of that information, I totally get what you say though, right? It's like, okay, I have all this information. Now what am I going to do with this information? Because information is as only valuable as what you apply and do with it. And so I'm glad that we got
Yeah.
connected because I'm all about the application. I want people to know themselves and then to harness that, actually use it in their leadership and work. So awesome.
Yeah.
So Ixchel, is that in short, is that why you decided to go on the path of the Astrovan certification? Because it's been such a joy having you and learning from you as well.
Yeah, I when I connected with you and started to learn about your work and um how easy it is for people to really grasp what's happening through your method, right? It can be such a complicated thing to first figure out what your birth chart is and then try to decipher it. And so to be able to really understand and how you really are able to hone in on the big three, and then you have some extra pieces in there that are just really juicy. I thought that was just a very helpful way to be able to start to share people's charts with them. And I've done many readings for family and friends, but never I think in a very cohesive way. And that might just be my neurotype, but having some of those like guardrails to sort of hone it in, I think is just fabulous. So definitely helps me at least. So.
Well, I love it. Thank you, Ixchel. So, the reason why I brought Ixchel on today is because we are going to be talking about the Pisces new moon. And of course, we're going to be giving a lot of information about these Pisces new moon, but also like reflection and journaling questions because you already know that new moons are times of planting seeds of intention and the power of intention to get clear on what you want to be able to plant that the heart the 90% of creating what you want in your life is getting clear on what you want. And so this Pisces new moon is your fresh start to get crystal clear on what you want from that Pisces empathy and compassion and why that is so important even in leadership and change making work. And so Ixchel, because you also you know the astrogram method, but you also love this idea of archetypal astrology. Would you tell us a little, like a quick definition of what archetypal astrology is, and then can we take a look at the new moon from that archetypal lens?
Hmm. Yeah, so archetypal astrology is another way of sort of, I mean, astrology is so complex. There's so many layers.
So
You can
many
get so
dialects and
lost.
languages, yeah.
Right. And, various different schools of thought and all of it. And so for archetypal astrology, it's really about the relationship of the planets. So really sort of honing in on the aspects between planets within the chart and or in transit astrology. And so it tends to have wider orbs because this is something that Rick in particular observed, and others have found that there seems to be a little bit larger wiggle room in there. And so the orbs can tend to be a little bit greater for like conjunctions and oppositions and things like that. So it really focuses on the archetypes in that Jungian sense of Jungian psychology. If you're not familiar with Jungian psychology, Carl Jung created some ways of describing different characteristics or personalities that seem to connect on a more universal level.
Mhm.
That there are certain sort of roles or characters that show up in cultures throughout the world. And from the Western lens has sort of named those. Many of those are what we, think of in terms of the planets and their Greek and Roman origins and stories and mythologies. But in archetypal astrology, it relies less on those stories and more on sort of different descriptive feelings and characteristics in a
Mhm.
positive or negative way. And that in those relationships, even if they're maybe more blessed, like conjunctions or sextiles or trines, or more challenging, like the quadratics, there can be positives or negatives to both. And so it's really just sort of um, using some, like a paragraph or so of descriptor words for each of those planets and really getting into that when looking at those aspects and sort of sussing out for the person being read, like what that story or that pattern is within those qualities. And so it makes it I think it makes it more simplified to think of what those characteristics could be
Mhm.
without necessarily all of the sort of the Western mythological baggage that can go along with that. And that's why I really like it sort of from that decolonial sense. And then really the emphasis on the relationships. So it's if we think about as above, so below, it's, the what's happening in the solar system between these planets in the way that they're, cosmically, geometrically connected is somehow imprinting upon us at birth certain qualities and characteristics.
Yeah.
And so getting a sense of what those patterns are, and especially because transits are very important in archetypal astrology,
Like what's
it's
happening at this point in time, your celestial cycle that's happening to you.
exactly, exactly. And in the mundane as well.
Mhm.
But it's really getting a sense for what those patterns are. And usually it's unconscious patterns, but when we're able to sort of get to know what those patterns are, then we have that conscious ability to come at those relationships and work with those energies of those planets in a more conscious way to be able to sort of reclaim and rewrite those narratives. So I think it's very powerful in that way.
Definitely, definitely. So can we take a look at this new moon and look at some of like the archetypal stories in, especially when we're thinking about all of the Pisces energies, Saturn, Neptune, and then maybe a little bit of Jupiter. So let me pull up the chart. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this chart is cast from San Francisco because that's where I live. The new moon happens on March 10th at 2 a.m. Pacific, 5 a.m. Eastern. And when we take a look at this chart, you can see that we just have this kind of pile up, this Pisces pile up from Saturn at 11 degrees of Pisces, Neptune at 27 degrees of Pisces, and then the sun and the moon sitting midway between Saturn and Neptune. Would you give us kind of an overview of the archetypal energies of Saturn and Neptune?
Yeah, so Saturn is definitely very much connected with the bones, teeth, structures, uh, foundations, institutions, time, both in the Chronos and Kairos. So, sort of spiral time as well as sort of clock, what we think of as like
Yeah,
clock time,
linear time versus
linear
quantum
time.
time.
Yeah. Um, and can be, also can be a little bit, on like the more negative side, maybe constraining, disciplined in more of like a limitation kind of way, those kinds of feelings. Neptune is, it's very much connected to the deep, vast waters of the unconscious. To I think it was Jung's book. What is it? Dreams, memories, and oh, I forget the full title, but it's dreams, it's memory, it's nostalgia. Um, it on the negative side, it can be drug use, overindulgence. What else can I say about Neptune? It's very much connected with that moment in the birth cycle. If we talked a little bit about Groff, Groff describes it as that moment when the child is born and like, it gets placed on the chest of the mother, that sort of divine union where everything is done and you get that wash of oxytocin and whatnot. If we want to talk about neurochemistry.
Yeah.
So um, it has sort of this really beautifully divine quality to it, but then also, in terms of the unconscious matters, uh, it can be too nebulous, it can be too unstructured, and it can lead to issues like drug dependency and
Yeah.
things like that is one of the ways that that's been marked.
For sure, for sure. I love that archetypal symbolism because when I think about just like when for like in the Astrobrand method and as we're learning astrology for leadership and change making, Saturn now turns doubt into mastery, turns authority over to authority and expertise within. it turns duty and obligation into accountability and self-responsibility. And so there's that symbolism. And then that Neptune, all of that avoidance and maybe, just being overwhelmed from like mental, emotional health and, moving into like drugs and addiction to escape that overwhelm from the shadows of Neptune, then move into like the conscious creating of a new reality and feeling interconnected with all. So, like that unity. So, what is your sense, like, as we talk about this particular new moon and this new moon in Pisces about creating empathy and compassion? And I'll talk a little bit later about why that's so important in leadership. What do you get a sense, because now we have the new moon at that midway point between this kind of crystallization energy of Saturn and this unification energy of Neptune? What does that mean to you when we think about this? How do you want to say? There's this word that I have in my head. This midpoint of coming together of the archetypes of Saturn and Neptune.
Yeah. Well, and when we think about the new moon time, I always like to lead my clients in a practice of composting. So really going through and looking at what worked and what didn't, and bringing that into the process of intention setting for the next month or the next week, or whatever that chunk of time is that you're doing that composting, which can be done on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, yearly, etc. So that ability, I think, that Saturn holds is one of synergy. So as we're working with all of the planets throughout the month in our intention setting work, and we're figuring out what worked and what didn't, Saturn has, I think, this ability to really synthesize all of it into that manifestation process. So it's within Tarot, it's definitely seen as such a key piece of any kind of material manifestation. You see it pop up a lot in the Pentacles cards, especially in this Six of Pentacles and the Nine of Pentacles. And so for me, that really has this like importance around making sure we are knowing what we're setting our intentions about, like you said, knowing what we want, but then really being able to work with those energies in a conscious way, and honoring Saturn in ritual. So I always look at Saturn as this ability to when we're consciously working with Saturn, if we can do it in a ritualized way, it loves that. Like it feels seen, it feels appreciated because of those structures and whatnot, but also in that sort of in that divine way of the qualities that Neptune brings, of that divinity of our actions, to be able to ritualize in a way that is holding reverence in working with these planets is, I think, a way to really bring the importance and the energetic archetypes into our work in a way that just honors and loves and cherishes them, and then they just are so happy to work with us. So.
I love that. I what I'm hearing, right, with like the Saturn, where you talk about the tarot and the pentacles and the manifestation of like what we want to, and I used the word earlier for Saturn, to crystallize, because when we think of like something that's coming together and crystallizing, to crystallize, it has a geometric form, a structure, a shape. And so that Saturn is giving that crystalline structure, and that Neptune, that kind of spiritual devotion or that trust in your higher self, your higher consciousness, your intuition. And so, what does that mean to bring together that blending of that crystalline structure and that spiritual in the midpoint of your new moon intention for Pisces, that compassion and empathy, the creating of new realities, that need, that desire for ease and flow, that simplicity and bliss can be the right path of success.
It's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
Pisces is such a great energy for flow as well.
yeah.
So, being able to hold space, right? Saturn sort of creating a container for that flow to come in and that emergent quality of Neptune to come in and be able to help you to crystallize what it is that you're intending and
Yeah.
then map it out in terms of Saturn, like put some good points on that of like how you're going to do that.
Flow is so Piscean in terms of, and you're such an expert in like flow states and the physical neurochemistry that's going on. But can you give us your definition of flow? We never discussed that, and that's so
Mm.
important.
Yeah, so there are a number of definitions out there. Anyone that's familiar with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, considered the godfather of flow, also a psychologist that really studied and was interested in flow states.
He
I
wrote
read
the book
his
on
book.
flow. Yeah.
Yeah, I read his book on flow in like
The 90s.
1993, I think, or something like that. I
Yeah.
was fresh in college and I was so thrilled that there was a name for this experience. For me, flow has been such an interesting and important piece of my life. Growing up when I was a child, there was such a space for flow to exist. I think my dad in particular was quite a flow junkie and very not risk averse, was very into all kinds of adventurous things. And I think we all got some of those genes. And so to be able to put a name to what it was really helpful. But for me, I wanted to sort of connect it back to this, what I think of as flow as our birthright. Flow has very much been hijacked in capitalism for
Mhm.
productivity. And I really want to take us back to a more indigenous way of knowing flow and being in that flow state. And so for me, flow is really that embodied or haptic experience of the cosmos and time. So when we are in flow, things really shift. Like our perception of ourselves starts to drop away, and our experience of time also speeds up or slows down. We sort of lose track of that more clock time that we talked
Yeah.
about earlier. And if we didn't have flow, we wouldn't exist. If we didn't have the ability to get in flow, we would have never been able to have the wherewithal to find food, to stay in that state, to go out and find food as hunters and gatherers. And so I think we owe so much to it. And yet I think there's a very difficult relationship that exists with flow for many people because it's been so used for capitalism that people are trained how to do flow so that they're more productive for someone else making money versus
Yes.
for our own desires and artistry and love of creativity. So much of that connection has been lost. And I think that's what keeps us connected to the cosmos in such a deep and profound way.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we just figured it out here. This new moon is absolutely how do we commit to creating those structures to protect our flow states? Because these flow states are almost as if we are in the middle, the midpoint, like this new moon, between manifesting here on Earth, that kind of Saturnian need to build structures, and that Neptune devotion to spirits. Because, I've heard of, even when you're thinking about hunting and gathering, like when hunters are in those flow states, they are just like in the moment, like time gets lost and they commune with whatever animal has consciously said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice myself for your sustenance. And we've lost that connection, that true sacred connection between the hunter and the animal. Or I'm a musician, and I know that when I am really truly playing music, not trying to play music, I'm in this state of there's no time. I might even be thinking of something else as I'm performing. I keep a notepad near my practice table because all of these ideas come forth. Or maybe you're a shower person, right? And you're in the shower and you're in that secondary state, and you have this flood of ideas. And why those flow states are so important, not just for productivity, but for spiritual wellness and creativity, just for the love of creation.
Yeah. Yeah. That reverence has definitely is something that I very much want to nurture and bring back in people. In my Mayan like astrology,
Yeah.
it's not a star chart. It's telluric energies. My elder sign is Toch, which is really about that reverence and that gratitude and that giving back. And so I'm now the last year or so in that third phase, that last phase of eldership. And so I'm really learning about what Toch means and how to bring that forth in me and for other people to help bring people back to those uh, rituals of reverence, really, and yeah, and gratitude. Yeah.
Breaking up with colonial figures of time to get back into your flow states, embodied flow. I love that so much. So let's turn our tables back to this new moon, because I want to give the listeners here who, they're change makers, they're leaders. And as we're thinking about this Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, and thinking about even just our year-long theme of Saturn and Pisces about deepening into your inner wisdom and mastery. What does, if you could just like name like three things that a change maker can do with flow that helps
Mm.
them along their way?
Uh, make space for it.
Okay.
That would be the Saturnian piece, right? Really making it a ritual, creating that space, and let's see, what would be the
What would they get? So somebody creates space to get into these flow states, and they're setting an intention to be able to access flow more easily. But what's the end result? What do they get from being able to access flow?
well, it's really it's that emergent quality of like what comes out of the flow state. So we can be in flow in so many different ways. Um, there's like 27 activators for getting into flow. Some of them are individualistic, and some are group. Um, but thinking about things where maybe the last time you were in flow, what happened at the end of it? Generally, there's a sort of this bath of neurochemistry that happens when we're in a flow state, which sort of sets it up to want to do it again and do it again. And so really paying attention to what you experience after flow and the joy, the endorphins, the oxytocin, the serotonin, all of these things that are really good for relationship building and connecting with other people. So even if it's an individualistic state that you're in, you can still sort of do something relational to recover and be with other people or pets or plants or
Yeah.
place, like being out in nature. Um,
So I'm gonna,
those,
can I interrupt for like a little second? There,
yeah,
what I'm hearing, right? It's like I was like, so what's the outcome of flow? And in true Pisces fashion, it's like, why are you trying to like control the outcome? Like, let it flow.
yeah,
the whole premise of intending flow is to be open to the opportunities and the relationships and the people that will naturally spring forth because you're in that neurochemistry and in that energy of flow. So the intention is simply just to be in flow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating too, because it's like when you're in flow, you don't really want to like wake up to that either, because you can break yourself out of it too. Like it can just be gone. So it's definitely like, it's such a dance. And, if there's sometimes the muse is, sort of called in that
Yeah.
moment in terms of being in flow. There's so many different ways that people can interact with the experience. For someone that is like doing downhill skiing, that flow state is there to keep them alive and to keep them focused and, really because the risk is so high in terms of catastrophe, for
Yeah, you're moving
instance,
so
right?
fast. Your
Yeah.
brain can't logicize. You need to be in that flow to be able to integrate all of your sensations, which, okay,
Yeah,
again, very Pisces. Like just
totally.
being
Totally.
one with the
Yeah, so
environment.
it really depends. Like it depends on so many different factors of like how you like to be in flow, how you find yourself in it. Because a lot of times people are not so ritualistic in it. They just sort of find themselves there. And typically what's sad is that people don't experience it very often. And so they very much want to stay in it when they're in it because it is so rare. And this is a place where I really try to discourage people from, doing that 4 hour declutter session, like really keeping it to like 90 minutes to 120 minutes, because there's a finite amount of dopamine that's needed in order to be in flow. And if we stick in flow for hours and hours on end, we'll actually deplete our flow and it'll make it harder to get back to it. So that's a little bit of the Saturn that's
Oh,
very
yeah.
supportive. It's like cap it, take care of your body, make sure you eat and go to the bathroom and drink water and do all those things
Spend time
because
with
you
your
can do
plant
it
friends,
again.
your animal friends, your
Yeah.
people friends. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why, like, that's capitalism is, it doesn't work, right? Because it's like, okay, you have an 8 hour work week. People are not productive for 8 hours. And so
Mhm.
if you get to choose and make your own time, if you decide that you're going to work 4 hours a day, like a 90-minute session, a 90-minute session, and maybe a third 90-minute session, you're going to be so much more productive in
Totally.
that hour, 3 hours, 4.5 hours than you are if you're trying to put in a whole day of work. Like it just doesn't
Yeah,
work that
so
way.
much more beautiful creativity and joy, the joy that comes out of that.
The
Yeah.
joy, the joy and empathy. So one last thing I want to talk really clearly about just Pisces, and we think about this joy and this one with and this compassion, the empathy. And I feel that people have a hard time really connecting the value between these like the emotional intelligence and labor of these water signs in leadership. But I want to remind everybody that emotional empathetic intelligence, if Harvard Business Law School, if Harvard Business says this is the truth and this is the truth, right? If you're going to take it from any expert, of course Harvard Business says about emotional intelligence, especially in leadership, is that emotional intelligence is the strongest predictor of performance. People with high emotional intelligence are more likely to stay calm under pressure, resolve conflict effectively, and respond to others with empathy.
Mm.
And this empathy, this ability to perceive and understand with others, like on an emotional level, to self regulate and to help others regulate, this is what creates unity. And this is so why Pisces is so brilliant at leadership. And whether you're a coach, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're an accountant or an architect, or classic like a filmmaker creating other worlds, this Pisces is that emotional connection that you need. And so when you're thinking about your new moon intention and about creating like flow and creating unity, getting crystal clear on how you're going to make space and time to get into these flow states, you have so much to play with. So what is your intention around unity and flow and about creating empathetic emotional connection with your people? That's going to be your assignment for this new moon, my friends. So, Ixchel,
Mm.
before I go into like kind of some of the new moon personalizations, because I love to give the listeners like their house activations, would you tell us what you have coming up? Because this is so excited. And we talk about flow, like this is like the perfect container, vessel, tapestry for flow states. Can you tell us about what you have coming up?
Yeah, I am so excited for this. I have put together a Chiapas writing retreat in June 9th to the 15th. I have been living in Nicaragua and exploring Central America and Mexico, and I'm now currently living in Chiapas, Mexico, the southern state before Guatemala, very much Mayan highlands. And it is it's just incredible here. Really beautiful pine forests and jungles. And I just want to share this with other people and to share the quality of flow that happens here. And I've been exploring retreat centers for so many years, disrupted by Nicaraguan uprisings, by COVID, by my own health challenges. And so finally, I found this incredible space to be able to bring some folks together to come learn a little bit about flow every morning, help to create those beautiful rituals and practices, and then have the afternoon and evenings for writing and to really be able to hold that space for other people to enjoy writing and or other creative endeavors. You know, if you're a painter or some other type of creative, the space that we have is just delicious to be able
Mhm.
to create those conditions for flow to emerge. So I'd encourage folks to come and check it out. We've got I think by the time this airs, there will be a little bit left over for early bird pricing. So if you're like, I got to get there, you can save $800 this week. If not, it'll still be
Yeah.
quite reasonable. And so come and check it out and message me if you have any questions. I would just love to have you here.
What's the website people can find out more?
ChiapasWritingRetreats.com.
So Chiapas Writing Retreats, so plural.com. I'll have the link in our show notes. And again, Chiapas, and I was looking at your sales page and looking at the pricing, and it is so affordable. And it's in June in Gemini season when also Jupiter has moved into Gemini. So, you know, we've been talking about like writing and thought leadership and putting your ideas and your ideals together. If you've needed the space and the time and somebody to hold your hands in reaching those flow states, Ixchel is for you. And this writing retreat is just, it's absolutely heavenly. Like your thoughts and your thought leadership will come pouring forth. So looking for an exotic, a retreat space to get some beautiful flow state and productivity through, this is Chiapas Writing Retreats is absolutely for you. So Ixchel, thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing your wisdom on flow, on archetypal astrology, your journey into the Astroban method. Um, let's take a look at the house activation. So, you know, through working with the Astroban method, I love new moon intentions, and new moon intentions are just absolutely the cornerstone of getting clear on what we want. And when we think about our natal chart, and you know, if you don't know how to read your natal chart, that's fine. You can think about Pisces and just creating more flow states to let what is yours emerge in your own work and your own business. But when we also think about looking at your houses and seeing where Pisces of 20 degrees exists in your natal chart, knowing that degree of 20 degrees acts as like an activator, a little button into that house. And the houses represent areas of your life and your business. So if you look at your natal chart, find the house that contains that 20 degrees, then listen to these suggested intentions, you'll likely already feel that call. So, if you are an Aries rising or have that 12th house activation, this new moon in Pisces, to be able to crystallize your flow state and be able to connect with the divine is absolutely about creating deep restoration and maybe completing some unfinished business. The This that relates to you, huh, Ishal? Your Aries rising with the 12th house activation.
Big time. Yeah.
It's like full circle moment of your flow states. Um, for those of us who are Taurus rising or have the 11th house of dreams and wishes, you're creating an intention around unifying your soul connected community outreach and creating your community platforms. So, getting into those flow states to not just relate with one person, but to relate with community. For Gemini rising, like me, or that 10th house activation, you're intending flow to deliver on your best spiritual and artistic work in your mission, your ultimate mission. And okay, just gonna speak as Gemini rising, and these are pre-written, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I've been thinking about, how I do my best work when I am rested. That
Mm.
if I work too much, I cut off all the flow. But even if I take a 2 hour nap and then like write for like 1 hour, I get way more done.
Mm.
And so, how can you rest, be in those, get into to create those flow, to do your best work and deliver on your ultimate mission? Those are for my Gemini rising folks. Cancer rising, or if you have that ninth house activation, you're creating and intending flow to get into your imaginative, sensitive expansion of your deepest why and your brand purpose. Leo risings, or eighth house, this is your soul level, alchemical, deep healing. Okay, my friends,
Mm.
Leo rising or eighth house, this Pisces new moon is really about getting into flow to release all that toxicity, to get into that state of alchemical transmutation, deep healing. Virgo risings, if this is for your flow states, again, to get into those relational so that you can connect to and commit to your soul customers, partners, and collaborators. Libra rising, or the sixth house activation, this is for you to get into your flow states to create easeful routines and wellness for yourself, both as a leader and simply as a person who deserves wellness. Scorpio risings, ooh, fifth house activation. So, creating flow states for your dreamy creative process and passion. Okay,
Mm.
Scorpio risings, I think you especially are being called to Chiapas. Okay,
Mm.
Sagittarius risings, or the fourth house activations, you're creating flow to create empathetic, emotional, safe spaces. All of these beautiful private home type spaces where deep healing spaces created for deep healing. Capricorn risings, or that third house, Capricorn and Pisces work so well together in that beautiful sextile. And so, Capricorn, you're creating your beautiful, socially just communications
Mm.
that connect through this beautiful, emotional, empathetic level. Aquarius risings, or second house, you are building your values and your ultimate brand promise through compassion and ease. And of course, lastly, my Pisces risings, you're having a first house activation. You are here to reestablish your visionary, empathetic, compassionate, one with your
Mm.
identity and leadership style. Ah, so beautiful. So, my friends, whatever calls to you, remember that your flow state is so important to be able to receive and have something birthed anew. Pisces season is that place of the gestation and the womb where mystery is happening, where you don't need to micromanage and control. Instead, ease and flow is how something else new emerges. So thank you, Ixchel, for joining me today. This was such a
Thank you so
beautiful
much.
episode.
I'm so thrilled to have been here for Pisces New Moon. It's just lovely.
It's a beautiful
Thank you.
new moon, isn't it? Is there
Mhm.
anything else that you'd like to add for our listeners before we sign off today?
Just all the gratitude for you, Leslie, in the work that you do, the way that you have really connected me back to this love of astrology. And just the way that you support your people. And I just love being in your circle. And it's just been such a reawakening. So thank you.
You're most welcome. And the gratitude goes both ways. So grateful for you, Ixchel. Thank you for sharing your stellar wisdom. All right. Bye for now, everybody. Happy new moon. As a human design projector, my energy shines more brightly because of people like you who share my work. If you enjoy this podcast and want to help build a movement of innovative astrology and leadership and spark the intuitive revolution, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, or better yet, share this podcast with your change-making besties. We will all shine brighter together as we create the future we want to see.